And mute myself. Okay, so I'm starting now.
Right. Hey, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Monmouth County Virtual Library. We're delighted that you're with us tonight for From Resilience to Celebration, a virtual in-depth pictorial journey inside San Francisco's beloved Chinatown, commemorating Asian Pacific American Heritage Month, presented by photographer Dick Evans and author Kathy Chin Leong. We invite you to visit our website and sign up for the library's electronic newsletter for updates on events and in-person services. This evening's presentation is being moderated by Greg Yen, an Asian American pharmacist and lawyer based in New Jersey. He's highly interested in the Asian American experience and preserving Asian American history. As a father to two sons, he knows the best way to important history such as this captured in San Francisco's Chinatown for it to be passed on to the next generations are through discussions and literature just like this. You'll notice that all microphones are muted for this evening's program. If you have questions, please type them into the chat. You can access the chat feature by rolling your mouse over the lower third of your screen. Select questions will be chosen following the presentation. And if you're not comfortable using the chat, you can use the hand raise function as well. Please, no recording of tonight's event is permitted. Again, welcome everyone, and thanks for being with us at the Monmouth County Virtual Library. A special welcome to Greg Yen, Dick Evans, and Kathy Chin Leong. With that, let's get started.
Thank you, Laura. Welcome everyone, and thank you for attending this event for the book San Francisco's Chinatown, a wonderful photo documentary book full of pictures, history, and culture by the photographer Dick Evans and writer Kathy Chin Leong. My name is Greg Yan, and thank you for the introduction again, Laura. I'm sure many of us have been to a Chinatown somewhere in the US, whether it's New York, San Francisco, or those in other cities. Sometimes we visit just for fun, to get some bubble tea, egg tarts, buns, a hot meal, or for the experience. Not many people think about the history of it all and documenting the history and culture. With my young kids, I really started to think more and more about how what's happened in the past carries through to the present. The first arrival of Chinese immigrants was in 1848, and the first reference to Chinatown was in 1853, and there have undoubtedly been a lot of developments and changes since then. That's why I'm so grateful to Dick and Kathy for taking the time to document the history and interview residents to get a glimpse of their lives, as well as what the very first Chinatown is like now. With that said, before we start the slideshow, we have a short 2-minute trailer to show what's upcoming. So please sit back and relax. Thank you for that. And now I'd like to introduce you to the stars of today's event, Dick and Kathy. Dick Evans is a San Francisco-based photographer with an interest in documenting the colorful and rapidly changing neighborhoods of the city. Born into a ranching family in Eugene, Oregon, he graduated as an engineer from Oregon State University and subsequently obtained a master's degree in management from Stanford. He has spent his 50-year career in the global metals sector, living in 5 countries and multiple locations in Africa, Europe, and North America. It was during these travels that he developed an appreciation for the diversity and richness of different cultures, both global and local, and an interest in documentary photography. Kathy Chin Liang, a lifetime career journalist, covers travel, technology, business, art, and architecture, and anything that piques her interest. Her writing has been published in the New York Times, Los Angeles Times, National Geographic Books, Sunset Magazine, and other nationally recognized publications. Growing up in a bicultural environment, Chinese at home and American at school, she is typical of many ABCs who struggled with identity issues and eventually learned to embrace their Chinese heritage. Like me. While she has traveled the globe to the Middle East, Europe, and Asia, rediscovering her Chinatown roots through collaboration on this book has been the journey of a lifetime. She lives in Sunnyvale, California. And with that, I will let you take it away.
Okay, thank you very much, Greg. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you to you and Laura for organizing this event sponsored by the Monmouth County Library. There are many downsides to the pandemic, but one upside has been, as we've done our book talks, a book launch, and then the book talks, we're able to actually do this event all around the country and internationally. So we were thrilled when we got a request from Monmouth County, New Jersey Library to do one a bit outside of California. And we have been able to do several events now, well outside. So we're just delighted to have you with us. Kathy and I will take you through some of our favorite images and stories that go with the book project, starting with this one. This is the main street in San Francisco's Chinatown. Some of you may have visited there. It's named Grant Avenue. It runs north to south for about 8 or 9 blocks. And as you can see, it's strung with red lanterns, Chinese signage, as you'll see in a minute, also Chinese style architecture. And this is what we typically think of in the Bay Area when we think of Chinatown. This comes to mind. In fact, we chose one of the building facades on Grant Avenue to be the cover for the book because it's so iconic and so representative of what we all identify with Chinatown. Grant Avenue also has a number of buildings with pagoda rooftops and the historic lanterns, as you see in this next image. Here we go. And I always thought when I first visited Chinatown in the 1970s, actually, I had just assumed that this architecture was brought to America by the early immigrants. And I think Greg or Laura mentioned that it was in around 1850. And they came for the gold rush and then subsequently for the railroads. But I had always assumed that that's where this architecture came from and why Chinatown grew up as it did. But that's not true at all. In fact, the first 50 years, from 1850 through the early 1900s, it was basically low-rise buildings, unsanitary conditions, not very attractive housing, crowded conditions, what we would call a ghetto, essentially. And that did not change until there was a major traumatic event in San Francisco's history. And those who know anything about San Francisco's history know that that was the 1906 earthquake, the famous earthquake that virtually leveled San Francisco. And what it didn't level, it triggered fires that then burned down much of what was left standing. So it was at that point when Chinatown had been literally destroyed, and the city fathers in San Francisco approached the Chinese or Chinese immigrant residents in Chinatown, suggesting to them that maybe they should move to the outskirts of the city, and they were going to displace them 4 or 5 miles out to the very outskirts of San Francisco. The reason was that Chinatown was right in the center of downtown San Francisco, and obviously had a significant future value for development there, and they wanted to get their hands on that property. Well, fortunately, the residents of Chinatown were resistant and resilient, and also must have been pretty good negotiators, because they were able to strike a deal with the city's leaders that they would stay exactly where they had been the last 50 or 60 years, but they agreed to have Chinatown rebuilt as both a tourist attraction as well as a residential community. And old Chinatown, as defined, was 24, 25 square blocks, about 8 blocks long and 3 blocks wide. And that's when all of these buildings came about, the next 10 years after 1906, or most of them, and then some were added in the 1920s. And it's interesting, note that apparently most of the building and most of the design was actually done by Caucasian architects and Caucasian builders, because that's who controlled those sectors of the economy, with perhaps some input from Chinese architects, but mainly from drawings and photographs of architecture in China. So that's why you get the very elaborate pagoda buildings and the curvatures and the architecture, the beautiful architecture, in fact, that you have today. Well, after the earthquake, Chinatown was rebuilt. It had grown in population, but was still growing. There was still an attraction for immigrants from southern China to come to the US and particularly to California and the Bay Area. So it continued to grow quite rapidly. And the immigrants who were coming in, not just Chinese, but all Pacific Ocean immigrants, were being channeled to Angel Island. And of course, back in New Jersey, you think of Ellis Island as being the port of entry for thousands and millions of immigrants that came on the East Coast. And on the West Coast, Angel Island was set up to be that center, although not as large or significant as Ellis Island. And that's where the new Chinese immigrants came. They were often detained. They were discouraged. There had been a discriminatory act passed in 1882 called the Chinese Exclusion Act, was literally called that. And it was specifically designed to discourage and deter and prevent increased Chinese immigration. So today, we talk about immigration coming from Mexico and Central America and elsewhere. And even as overt as that is, it doesn't compare to how blunt and overt the discrimination was against the Chinese for a number of decades around 1900. And as the immigrants came in, they were detained and held until their requests could be evaluated and granted or denied. By the way, most were granted in the end, so that people did get in. But people were assigned numbers, which I think is a very poignant reminder of how people were treated at that time. Here is an inscription that was carved on the wall, on the wooden wall of the detention center, by an 11-year-old boy, as you see down at the bottom, as late as 1939. There are hundreds of these inscriptions carved on the walls in the detention center, which is now a museum. And in fact, you can see them. Several historians actually went there about a decade ago and captured these inscriptions and put them in a book so that they're all collected now in a book. This particular one is displayed at the Chinese Historical Society Museum in Chinatown. Now, even going forward from that, of course, in about the 1950s, post-World War II, there was a renewed welcoming of Chinese immigrants and a better treatment of Chinese in Chinatown and around the United States. And that stemmed from the fact that China and the United States were allies in World War II. So after the war, there was a new aggressiveness, assertiveness by Chinese immigrants to be accepted and for some of the discrimination to be removed. So that started to change dramatically post-World War II, and fortunately changed significantly. But the understanding of social justice issues in Chinatown remains to this day, where there is a renewed and very unfortunate wave of violence with Asians and other discrimination. But there are two very symbolic statues that are much more contemporary, having been done over the last couple decades. This one is right in the center of Portsmouth Square, which is the heart of Chinatown. And those of you familiar with the Tiananmen Square student uprising in Beijing in 1989 may recognize this. This is a replica of what was a 50-foot statue that the students had built in Tiananmen Square. And then years later, a sculptor created 3 or 4 of these out of bronze, as you see here. And this one is in Portsmouth Square as a constant reminder of that event that took place in 1989. Another reminder of significant social justice issue is this one called the Comfort Women. And it is a tribute to the young girls and women who were enslaved by the Japanese army and the Japanese government during World War II. There are 3 girls here because they represent 3 countries from which the sex slaves came: Korea, China, and Philippines. So this is a very emotional statue. It actually, when it was erected about a decade ago, it actually precipitated a split between San Francisco and its longtime sister city, Osaka, who had asked that it be taken down, which San Francisco and Chinatown did not. So it actually ruptured that longtime relationship. Hopefully at some day in the future that will be put back together. So I think that the reason to show those on top of a very brief history of Chinatown is to say that discrimination and the resilience that goes with it have always been part of Chinatown over its 170-year history. So although today we see this new wave of some violence against Asian elders and others and some of the overt discrimination and treatment, to many young people, this seems brand new. But to others, they understand that there have been periods in the past where it was equally virulent and equal challenge. The positive side of that, I think, is that the community within Chinatown has developed over the decades a high degree of resilience and has also learned how to celebrate their existence by carrying on traditions like the Lunar New Year Parade and others, which we'll talk about briefly. So during the course of our book project, Kathy was interviewing people and businesses as we did the photo shoots, and interviewed over 100 people. And I'd like to turn it over to her now for some of her thoughts and stories.
This is James Leong's mural covering 100 years of Chinese in America. and it was criticized by the Chinese community in Chinatown because they felt it reinforced stereotypes, even though it was historically accurate. The rejection hurt the artist so much that he left the United States and spent the rest of his flourishing career as an artist in Europe. And this 7-panel, beautiful, beautiful art piece was later recovered from a Chinatown rec room where panels were actually used as part of a ping pong table. So you can see it today on permanent display at the Chinese Historical Society of America Museum in Chinatown. James Leong later on was asked to return to retouch the mural and was welcomed back with honor. In front of the James Leong mural on the left is Sue Lee. She's an expert in Chinese American history. And you might be wondering, well, what's the significance here? It was Sue Lee who recovered a set of 12 extremely rare watercolors by the late Jake Lee. These watercolors depicted early Chinatown history, so it was really rare to capture this era. The original works once hung in the Elegant Cons restaurant, and after Cons was sold in the 1990s, the paintings mysteriously disappeared until Sue hunted them all down.
I mentioned earlier that partly because of the discrimination against the Chinese community and residents of Chinatown, that it did develop quite a resilience, including identity with its culture and celebrations that relate to that culture. The biggest cultural event of the year, of course, is Lunar New Year. And in a typical year, it's quite an event with hundreds of thousands of people attending the parade in which the Lunar New Year week culminates. So this is a typical scene from the parade. This is, I think, 2018. Unfortunately, 2019, I'm sorry. Unfortunately, 2020 and 2021, we just passed it. There has been no parade. First time in many decades that there hasn't been. But it looks promising for 2022, and I'm sure it will be a great event to make up for the 2 lost years. But this is a mile-long parade that runs through the heart of San Francisco and the heart of Chinatown. You see here the dragon dancers. You see on the left a couple of lion dancers. You see the crowds along the way. So it's a huge event, a fun event. You have everything from dragon and lion dancing to stilt walkers to marching bands to commercial floats like Qingdao Beer, Southwest Airlines, to all the politicians who can find a float or a car to ride. So it's a huge event. And it's a great event. Perhaps I don't know, but perhaps New York, Chinatown has a similar type of parade. Here's a couple of stilt walkers, young elementary students, 8th graders, I think, from West Portal Elementary, which is a couple miles outside of Chinatown, but in San Francisco. And you see them all dressed up in Monkey King costumes here. And the next one is another stilt walker from the same school, a young woman who is also an 8th grader, I believe, dressed up in a ancient Chinese royalty costume. Now, each year, of course, there's a symbol for the year of the zodiac in the Lunar New Year. And then, of course, it recycles every 12 years. So in 2021, it is the year of the ox. And here you see an ox displayed. And you'll also see many trinkets, gifts, paintings. Everything will be done in oxen for that this year. And then, of course, next year it'll be different. But it's significant, I think, that the ox is reputedly symbol for hard work, honesty, openness, all great attributes that we would love to see the year 2021 replicate. The Lunar New Year Parade, of course, is not the only event. There are cultural events throughout the year. This is just a photo from the Moon Festival, which is the major fall event. And you can see the moon goddess and her god. The woman who's the goddess there, Maggie Wong, has been doing this role for at least a decade, if not more. She is a TV personality and also a journalist. And she also played an important role in helping us in the book project because at the early stages, she made a number of contacts for us with the business owners, with nonprofits, with influential individuals in Chinatown, and then was helpful taking us around and introducing us and pointing us to things that would be both important from a story standpoint and important from images that represent Chinatown.
Today, if Bruce Lee were alive, the action hero would be 80 years old. He came on the scene in the 1970s when Chinese males had no role models in the media. If they were on TV, they were cast as houseboys or evil emperors. If they were in lead roles, it wouldn't be Chinese. It would be white people who played the roles with taped eyes, speaking broken English in stereotypic accents. Bruce Lee changed the life of this man, Jeff Chin. When Jeff was a boy, he was picked on because he was Chinese. And one night after a really difficult day in middle school, he sensed that the Bruce Lee poster reached out to him one night, telling him everything was going to be okay. Well, since then, he's done everything to make Bruce Lee proud. He's become one of the top collectors of Bruce Lee memorabilia with more than 10,000 items, including the suit he wore in Enter the Dragon. And portions of his collection have traveled to the museums around the world, including the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. We're here now at Skyline Memorial Park. We consider it the Ritz-Carlton of cemeteries in the local area called San Mateo. Every spring, Taoist priests and families come by the busload during Qingming, which is a spring holiday to honor dead ancestors. Now in 2019, Dick and I got a tour of the manicured premises with amazing vistas. Now this is such a contrast because in the 1800s, Chinese could not be buried in the same cemeteries as other races, and they were pushed outside of San Francisco to be buried. Now, Tai Chi is a Chinese tradition, from early morning exercise classes to vibrant performances. And during the photography shoots for the Chinatown book, we found out that there's a worldwide International Tai Chi Day, and we're able to capture some images. We also found a local Tai Chi master, Sifu Shu Fen Cao, willing to demonstrate some of the Tai Chi positions in front of murals and other iconic landmarks on the streets of Chinatown. Now we're here at Far East Cafe with the Tong family. And this is a celebration of a red egg and ginger party. This is a baby party celebration for a 1-month-old. And you have to have dyed red eggs to represent fertility and a plate of ginger, which represents energy and strength. Now, I believe it's the kids that love Chinese New Year the most. Here's my nephew, Tyler Pham, holding up his 2 red envelopes filled with 2 fresh bills for double happiness. In Chinese tradition, when a young lady grows up and gets engaged, the bride-to-be will order a custom-tailored cheongsam to wear for her wedding. Meanwhile, the wedding tea ceremony is a treasured tradition, but fewer couples are honoring it. But Liana and Michael Tang are the exception. Here they presented tea to their elders, and in turn, the parents and grandparents, one couple at a time, will offer them money and jewelry. Now, brides aren't the only ones who receive jewelry. Many times an older woman will start handing down her heirlooms to her granddaughter, daughter, or daughter-in-law when she feels that the time is right. In ancient times, people believed if you wore a 24-karat necklace or jade bracelet, you would be protected from evil spirits. So Chinese jewelry is very unique. It is not only ornamental, but many believe it possesses powers, and it's been used as money for bartering during times of war. This scene is one of my favorites. It depicts everyday Chinatown life. Here you see this modern woman passing a traditional tailor shop. She's wearing a traditional jade bracelet on her wrist, probably from her mother or grandmother. And then she carries a bag of good luck oranges and a box of bakery treats representing a sweet life. This is my family sharing dim sum, otherwise known as going to yum cha, which is a common memory for American-born Chinese. Little plates of chicken feet and steamed tripe and gizzards are not exotic, but everyday dishes. Please type in and tell us what your favorite dim sum is.
You've probably already sensed that Chinatown is a very strong community spirit. And just to put an anecdotal number on that, it has more nonprofit organizations than any other neighborhood in San Francisco per capita. There are dozens of nonprofit organizations. There's also a very strong spirit of getting together and just meeting and sharing. This is a photo from Portsmouth Square. Any day you walk through Portsmouth Square, you'll typically see women and men out playing cards, playing mahjong, reading Chinese newspapers. This particular day, as I went out to take photos of that, it started to rain very heavily. It just started to pour. And I assumed that the card games were done for the day, but I was wrong. As you can see, the umbrellas came out. In this case, the women moved to under the gate for some protection and never folded their hands. They just kept playing the same hands and the game went on. I was there until the rain stopped, and when it stopped, they were within 5 minutes back out in the sun. Here's another different venue, but this is nearby Portsmouth Square. This happens to be a weekend morning. We were invited into one of the family benevolent associations, of which, again, there are actually dozens in Chinatown. And on the weekend, in this case, you see men, but women as well, will come in, play cards, play mahjong, Chinese checkers, and read newspapers and just chat. So keep in mind, there are dozens of these benevolent associations, and people come from all around Chinatown, but also from outside of Chinatown in on the weekends to make that connection. Another example of Chinatown's community spirit is the Miss Chinatown USA pageant. And it's a pageant open to young women, not just in San Francisco, but in Chinatowns all around North America, so the US and Canada. And you might ask, why have a separate Miss Chinatown pageant? And the reason is that historically, the young Chinese women were prohibited or covertly discouraged from participating in Miss America or Miss California contests or other beauty contests. So they created their own Miss Chinatown USA. This is Miss Chinatown USA 2019, Catherine Wu. You can see her here with some elementary students. It's at a bilingual school, one of the oldest bilingual schools in San Francisco. And she visited there regularly, promoting bilingualism and reading in both Chinese and in English. We also found that she had another skill that we never anticipated. We found out she was a world level archer. You can see her here with her competition bow that we took took this photo at on the bay, as you can see. And she's actually in her USA costume. She had hoped to, or USA, yeah, garb. She had hoped to participate in the Olympics last year, but of course they were postponed, and unfortunately, she was not able to. Fortunately, now I should say, of course, Miss America and Miss California pageants are wide open, and at least you don't have the discrimination that you had for many decades before. Another institution that grew up because of discrimination is the Y in Chinatown. Again, Chinese residents in Chinatown were discouraged or prohibited from attending or joining the Ys in other parts of San Francisco. So they banded together and worked with the Y to create the Chinatown Y, which now for a number of decades has been a very valued and treasured community resource. And final, just one more example. This is the donor wall at the Chinese hospital. And in fact, it's a new hospital that replaces the old Chinatown hospital, which is where Kathy was born, and also Bruce Lee was born in the old Chinese hospital. But a few years ago, the community banded together. You see donors listed here who all contributed. Huge community effort. They built a brand new, beautiful, state-of-the-art Chinese hospital, which also has the added feature that it offers some more traditional Chinese medical treatments, in addition to all of the modern Western treatments as well.
Now, Chinatown is the densest neighborhood outside of Manhattan. It's only 1/5 of a square mile, and it houses up to 30,000 people. So imagine your home is the size of a closet shared with 4 more people. Welcome to single renter occupancy, or SRO apartments. Here, with no access to washers or dryers, you have to hand wash and hang your clothes outside to dry. You share a restroom and kitchen with neighbors. One of Chinatown's heroes is the Reverend Norman Fong, who was the former executive director of the Chinatown Community Development Center. Now, on the day of this photo shoot, a young lady came up to us asking that he would come and visit her grandmother because the grandma was too sick to walk down the stairs to go see the doctor. The family wanted Reverend Fong to come and pray for her. So with a lot of compassion and tenderness, he took her hands in his and he whispered a prayer over her in Chinese. Going from old to young, if you're on the Dragon Boat racing team from Community Youth Center, all of your gear and practice time is free of charge. Thanks to this nonprofit, the sport is transforming the lives of at-risk kids who might be tempted to join the wrong crowd. This is Bella Chen, and she was admittedly very unathletic before joining the team, but at the time of this photograph, she became the team captain. Today, many Chinese kids are proud of their heritage. Yuhan Chen, only 6, picks up a brush for the first time at this Chinese New Year event, and she finds out she really excels at Chinese calligraphy. Tyler Pham samples dragon beard candy, making a beard of his own. Dragon beard was originally the dessert of ancient Chinese emperors. It's made from a solid block of syrup and hand pulled like taffy to form thousands of strands. Now, these colorful buildings are not just ornamental. They belong to family associations, and there's more than 200 of them in Chinatown. Back in the 1800s, when you landed in Chinatown as a Chinese immigrant, you would look up your association based on your village or your last name, and the association would welcome you, and they would secure a job and a place for you to stay. Many of these association rooms feature shrines. Note that these are private clubhouses, not open to outsiders. So getting in to take pictures for a book like ours was extremely rare. A play called King of the Yees about family associations came to San Francisco 2 years ago. The comedy was written by Lauren Lee, a local who grew up in San Francisco's Chinatown, and she spent many years attending association functions. The largest one is called the Chinese Consolidated Benevolent Association. It consists of more than 50,000 members in the US and Canada. Recently, they worked with officials to block marijuana shops from coming into Chinatown. But the largest problem facing associations today is future leadership, because many of them are headed by elderly men, and most sons are not involved, and membership to this is not open to women. This is Cecilia Chang, who recently passed away at 100 years of age. She was very famous, a restaurateur that many nicknamed the Julia Child of Chinese cooking. Back in 1968, she opened the very first and elegant, successful Chinese restaurant called the Mandarin, and it was based near Fisherman's Wharf. Her son Philip caught the restaurant bug also, and he is the co-founder of P.F. Chang's with restaurants all over the world. In the 1800s, Chinese schools were erected because parents feared their children would lose language and culture of the homeland. The youth learned Cantonese, the language of the Guangdong province, where most Chinese were from. But today, kids are learning Mandarin, the national language of China.
I might just mention we're about 10 minutes away from the end of the narrative slideshow. So please enter your questions. I see we have a few coming in, but please enter your questions as we go. Music and dance is another important cultural aspect for the Chinese culture that is in Chinatown. And here you see a young man putting up the props for the Chinese opera, which puts on some very elaborate and striking performances. I was able to go backstage as the opera got ready for one of their performances and took photos beginning about 3.5 hours before the performance. So all the way from the basic makeup to what you see now, to a near complete costume. And it actually takes that long to put it all on. And once you go through that and see that, it really makes you appreciate the final scenes like this one when you see it then in performance. Just anecdotally, I did ask the diva here, how long does it take you to take the makeup off? Keeping in mind it took 3.5 hours to put it on. And she said about 15 minutes at max. We're pretty good at getting it off once we're done. Another type of performance or performers is this group that you see getting ready, pre-performance. This is a group called the Grant Avenue Follies. And as you can tell, it's women who are mostly in their 70s, with a few in their 80s and maybe a few in their late 60s. Most or all of them were dancers in the 60s and 70s during Chinatown's golden era, with some of the burlesque shows and dancing that was featured there. They have come back. They've been organized by a woman named Cynthia Yee, who has gotten them together. They now put on performances that are really fun to watch. The same kind of performances they used to do. And when you see them perform, it's really a good endorsement of dance, I think, as a way of staying fit well into later life, because you see how well they perform, as you see here, up into their 70s and even 80s.
Moving a 10-pound lion head to mimic a real lion is real work, and if you haven't practiced, you won't last through an entire parade. This man is Corey Chan, the Lionhead Whisperer, and for 40 years he's been restoring injured lion heads and gives them back their roar. This man is just self-taught. He replaces eyelid strings used for blinking, glues on new fur, and paints over scratches until the lion looks like new. And after the repairs, Corey says, new memories come back to the lion. Aren't these stunning?
To most of us who have visited a Chinatown, I think you'll agree that it's not complete unless you go to a restaurant, go to a bakery, go to a market. The food is so integral with the culture. Here's a very local establishment. You see roasted ducks in the window. And here you see a very new modern establishment called China Live, but the roasted ducks are still there. China Live is interesting in that it's one of 2 and soon to be 3 new restaurants, which are very modern, contemporary, and one of them, Mr. Jew's, has a Michelin star. China Live is equally good in terms of quality. And I think next you see a picture of the kitchens. We were able to go into the kitchens. This is not what you think of typically when you think of a Chinese restaurant kitchen. You can see this well-lit, expansive, modern kitchen with the stainless steel tabletops and the outfitted people there. Also, they have giant steamers, as you see here, which you can view as you have your meal. They're out where you see them. Here's one of my favorites. This is the giant chocolate mousse mixer that this young woman is mixing up for dinner for that evening. There are also, well, here's
for a second.
Yeah.
Laura, I think I've heard that the attendee chat is disabled, but I think the Q&A function is working. So I think just letting.
Oh, thank you, Greg. Yeah, I noticed that the chat was frozen at 1. So I see the Q&A now just added one. So, so great. So use the Q&A.
Yep.
Terrific. The last picture was the restaurant Mr. Jew's, which is actually in the building that is the cover of the book. If you remember at the very beginning, it is in that same building. You see, again, a very modern contemporary kitchen. And here you see a very clean, modern, contemporary place setting for Mr. Jew's. And that's the one that has the Michelin star. There's also some new young restaurateurs like this woman, Kathy Fang. Her parents had a restaurant for decades in Chinatown and still do. She grew up working in that restaurant in the kitchen and serving. But she's now started her own restaurant called Fangs, suitably, and has won quite a number of awards for her innovative cooking and has done a number of television shows for her cooking.
This happy employee works at Mao Li Xingqi, and it's a business of dried meats and poultry that spans over 7 generations. I used to have this for breakfast at my grandmother's house. It's salted fish, and I would love it. Papa would steam this over rice for breakfast. Coffee Crunch Cake is famous at Eastern Bakery. It's only one of 2 that makes it in San Francisco, and the other is in Japantown. Stockton Street is known as the locals' Chinatown, and every day at 4 o'clock, little grandmas emerge from their apartments and they come for produce that's on sale. And it's one thing that unites us Chinese through the generations is that we all love a good bargain. These dried roots and fungi are used for healthy Chinese soup recipes. And you take a fistful of this and a fingerful of that, it'll clear your acne, strengthen your qi, and improve your circulation.
So in addition to restaurants, there are a lot of other small businesses in Chinatown. And in fact, the entrepreneurs and small shops of Chinatown are really the economic backbone of Chinatown. Here you have one of the most, I think, resilient, most entrepreneurial and successful shop owners. This is Ting Chen, and her store is called the Wok Shop, as you might have guessed from the photo. She claims to sell the most woks anywhere between Hong Kong and New York City. And I believe that's probably true. She was fortunate to have already put her business online so that people could access it online, place orders online before the pandemic hit. And that was really helpful to her because she was able to continue to do business, although her physical shop was shut down. She continued at age 82 to work 6 or 7 day weeks, 4 hours a day, filling all the orders online. She's just a delight. If you ever visit San Francisco, I think, and Chinatown, everyone will tell you, stop in the wok shop, even if you don't need a wok. And hopefully when Tane is there and can give you her frank opinion on the merits of different woks and anything else you want an opinion on. She's a real gem. Other entrepreneurial businesses are like Herbalist that you see here. Also, incidentally, the husband of the Tai Chi master, which we found out accidentally when we visited there. Here is a florist. There are several florists and the owner there. Here you see a studio photographer, and on his walls, he's got at least 5 or 6 US presidents and California governors who he's taken their pictures visiting, and many other celebrities that have visited Chinatown over the decades. This is an acupuncturist that we visited. We were able to spend an hour or more with he and his wife, not just talking about acupuncture, but going sort of back in the back room where his wife prepares some of the herbal remedies that go with the acupuncture, and hearing all about how he does it. And as you see, of course, he's got a mannequin there with all the key acupuncture points. This is another business. You'll find several of these. This is a traditional tea selling and tea tasting business. Several of these tea shops have an excellent collection of different teas. And you also, if you want, you can get a tea tasting ceremony and really lesson from people on everything on how to steep the tea, how to select the flavor you want, how to serve it. A really delightful way to spend an hour. Traditional jade carving and jewelry shops, which cater especially to tourists and therefore have been hit the hardest together with like the tea shop because they're so dependent on tourism, which for good news now is finally starting to reopen. You also have some new shops emerging, some much more contemporary businesses. This happens to be the gift shop at China Live, the new restaurant. And the woman here is the co-owner and wife of the chef, Cindy Chan. She curated this gift shop by herself. She traveled all over the world, especially Asia and China, but Europe as well, hand selecting the items to carry in the gift shop. And it's a fabulous place to find high quality, unique gifts there. And another similar in the sense of being new, contemporary, is this one called Kim Plus Ono. They specialize in hand-printed silk garments and also cosmetics and other accessories, as you saw on the table. This photo was taken during the Moon Festival, and they happened to be holding a Crazy Rich Asians lookalike contest. So that's why the customer here is dressed up as she is. And in her hand, you can see one of the typical, very high quality, very beautiful silk garments that they have. And I think, yeah, the final image, and then we'll go to the questions. This is the back cover of the book. It's also a mural that is on a hallway inside of a new restaurant called Dim Sum Corner. Very nice dim sum restaurant right on Grant Avenue. And we love this image because here you've got a very contemporary vibe with the graphic arts type mural. And you've also got obviously a modern looking young woman with a camera. And she's looking at you while you're looking at her. But also you can see she's wearing a very traditional red Chinese dress. So we thought this really exemplifies the modern Chinatown today. One eye to the back, looking back toward the heritage and the cultural history, and the other eye looking forward to the future. So with that, we would love to take your questions. I see a number of more questions have come in on the Q&A box since Greg made the announcement that the chat wasn't working. So Greg, over to you to lead us through some questions.
Great. Great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for taking the time and walking us through that. I know we're getting short of time. It might be a little bit over, but we'll move on to Q&A now. The first question would be for Dick. So why this project and why Chinatown? Can you share what inspired you to do this project?
Sure, happy to. And we may even have an image that would be relevant to that. Yeah, here it is. This is the third of 3 books that I've done on neighborhoods in San Francisco. First one was Haight-Ashbury down in the lower center. Then the Mission District, which is the Latino district of San Francisco, and then Chinatown being the third. Each one has been about a 3-year project. They've all been nonprofit projects designed to benefit the community that is involved. And the objective has been to document the cultural uniqueness, the cultural value, the history of these neighborhoods, and at the same time to document the modern challenges that they face of gentrification, discrimination, housing issues, homeless issues, drug issues. So it's not just the fun side and the good side, it's also to document the challenges that they face. So the Chinatown book was selected, or Chinatown was selected because number one, people who enjoyed the first 2 books, when I asked what did they think would be a good next book, many of them said Chinatown. And the criteria that I was using is I wanted neighborhoods that were historically significant, currently relevant. In other words, active communities in which things are going on today. And also, of course, something that was colorful and interesting and would be stimulating to learn about and understand. And Chinatown really hit all of those 3 of those criteria, so well. So that was the reason for choosing it.
Great. Thank you so much. And this next one is for Kathy. You interviewed over 100 people. How open were they, and how did you gain their trust?
Well, I didn't grow up in Chinatown. I was on the outside in the neighborhood called Sunset. So we had to ask people at the Culture Center, which is shown here, to introduce us to people. And once they heard about the book project, they were very excited about it. So it was formal introductions by local residents got us into places like these benevolent associations that are secret societies. We knew friends of friends. And so that's what helped us get into these SRO apartments and behind the scenes of kitchens. So we're very fortunate in that respect.
Great. And I'd like to point out that that parallels a lot of how Chinatown works and how a lot of Asian communities work too, friends of friends. So I'm glad we could use that way as well.
Yeah.
So our one of our questions is from a anonymous attendee. This might be more for Kathy, or might be for Dick as well, since he's been spent so much time there. How do you think San Francisco Chinatown will evolve in the next 5 or 10 years? This person has heard there's a lot of traditional shops in New York that have shut down, or more fusion restaurants that are more hip or social media friendly pop up.
I think that's happening now. The last statistic I heard on Grant Avenue, which is the tourist street, out of the 200 shops that were there, there's only 45 right now that are open. So the others, I don't know if they're permanently closed or temporarily closed, but the newer shops that have gone in, like one is a chocolate store called Jade, which is more contemporary, using Asian ingredients and fruit flavors like lychee and mango into chocolate, which is more trendy. There's a matcha shop, a Japanese matcha shop. So you see kind of more of like a maybe an Asian flair coming in, not strictly Chinese. But we're really hoping for the best. Most of these properties are owned by Chinese and Chinatown family associations. So we're really hoping that they will lease out the property to culturally relevant businesses. Dick, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I would agree. You're going to see a shift, I think, to more Asian fusion. But it's much slower in San Francisco Chinatown in the past than it has been in other Chinatowns around the United States. The Oakland Chinatown, for example, across the bay is very much an Asian town now. And the big reason, I think, is that Chinatown in San Francisco, as Kathy mentioned, much of the property is owned by Chinese and, in fact, Cantonese. It's not Chinese broadly. It is narrowly. It originally was from southern China and continues to be. So it has this very strong identity that you have, and the resilience that it's shown over decades. It's survived 170 years. And as I see it start to reopen, I see some of the leaders that are promoting it and encouraging people back and setting up events like restaurant openings and even laser shows and other things, are some of the traditional Chinese business people who have investments in China. So I see their commitment and their resilience as being a real plus to help its survival in the future.
Great. That kind of goes in line with some of the other questions. One of them is how the business was affected by COVID. And I know Kathy had mentioned 200 shops, now down to 45. Is there any other facts that you guys have to shed light on how much it's affected San Francisco's Chinatown?
Well, maybe just one comment, and then I'm sure Kathy has some specific stories. But Chinatown was shut down 2 months before the rest of San Francisco and the rest of most of the United States. And that was because of the worries of COVID, the unfounded worries, I might say, and the unwise comments by our president at the time, really shifting the blame to China and really poisoning the atmosphere for people to continue to come to Chinatown. So they've suffered longer than others. And as I say, now it looks like things are opening up. And I also say unfounded because the rate of COVID infections in San Francisco were the lowest in Chinatown. Very ironically, the fears were the greatest and the actual incidence of cases was the lowest. I think partly because the residents were aware of the risk. They knew what was going on in China. They were familiar with wearing masks already and were disciplined about following the rules. So they were unfairly affected, I think.
Kathy, do you have anything to add?
I think that, this is a real test right now for Chinatown. I mean, it has suffered other things in the past, but this is like a double whammy because of the the recent Asian hate crimes together with the pandemic. So it's like a double whammy for them. But you know, the people that live there, the merchants that are there, they're very strong. The Dragonbeard candy guy, he had a closed shop, and then I talked to him on the phone, and he goes, "Oh, well, but I'm doing, you know, I'm still making it out of my home and doing private deliveries." So still passionate about what he does, you know. So I'm hoping that these people will come back. And here's the Fortune Cookie Factory. Kevin Chan has taken over his mom's business, and they're still open every day. And you know, the ones that are resilient, passing on to the next generation, you know, our hopes and prayers are with them. You know, support them as much as you can. Go to your local Chinatown. I encourage all of you, go to Boston, go to New York, support your local one.
Mm. And with that, one of the questions was, there's Chinatown in Manhattan, but there's also some in other boroughs like Queens and Brooklyn. And I know you had mentioned there's one in Oakland as well. Are there any other smaller ones in the San Francisco area?
There's lots of enclaves, you know, like wherever you see in Ranch 99, you'll see an enclave of restaurants. A lot of the suburbs have their own little restaurant enclave with markets and things. And I'm sure you have those on the East Coast as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's interesting that Chinatown is, I think, 25,000, maybe max 30,000 residents. But of course, the Chinese population in the Bay Area is hundreds of thousands, if not over 1 million. And as Kathy mentioned, you have these sort of satellite Chinatowns. There's one here in the Clement Street area, where it not only has the restaurants and the shops, but it also has 3 or 4 large scale markets where you can get all the same produce and herbs and everything that you get in Chinatown, right there on Clement Street. And you may have noted, I showed a couple of stilt walkers from West Portal Elementary, which is another neighborhood in San Francisco, which has a concentration of Chinese. So there are a number of these. And another thing that makes me optimistic about Chinatown is, even though physically it's quite small, both in geography and population, but many of the people who supported own businesses, come in on weekends, are from all over the Bay Area. So it is really central to a much larger community.
That's great. Well, I think, I know this was slated for an hour, and we're gone a little bit over, but I want to thank everyone for their questions. And I don't know if anyone has any last words they want to share, or if Laura, you wanted to close out for us.
Okay, Dick and Kathy, maybe you wanted to just mention something about book purchases, since you're not available to sign it.
Right. All right. Well, a good way to buy the book would be to go to the book website. We have a website just for the book. It's ChinatownBookSF.com. So ChinatownBookSF.com. And there you'll see a tab you can click on order. It gives you a number of options with a hot link from Amazon to the Chinese Culture Center of San Francisco. I would encourage you, if you're willing to pay $1 or $2 more, to buy it from the Chinese Culture Center of San Francisco, because then they will get the maximum benefit. They're a nonprofit that is supporting a lot of the activities in Chinatown.
And those are autographed too.
And those are all autographed, yeah. Well,
That's
or were.
perfect.
We may have to go in there again, Kathy, because they've sold quite a few and have had to reorder. So we may have to go back in and sign them. But and all the revenue from this project, so I mean, it's not just the profit, it's all the revenue goes to either a nonprofit book publisher, Heyday, or to the Chinese Culture Center or other nonprofits. So it really benefits the community and the nonprofit publisher that is the one that, got this published.
That's great. That's great to hear. Thank you for sharing that with us. I'd like to thank you all for being here, and actually thank you as well, because we just had a couple copies of your book donated by Kathy and Dick. So they're available through the library too. If you have a library card with us, you are very welcome to check them out. I have a copy at home right now. It's beautiful. I hate to bring it back. It's my family is enjoying it as well. So, and I'd like to extend our thanks on behalf of all of our library patrons and everyone that was with us tonight. Anyone that couldn't join us tonight and will be joining us in the future, thanks for being with us. Dick, Kathy, Greg, Laura in the background there. It was a pleasure to work with you all, and we're just delighted to see what comes next. See what your
Thank
next
you.
Right.
one is.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much. You've been a great
Hi.
hosts.
Great.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Good evening. All right, we'll see you again.